All right, I hit record and I'm with Leslye Penelope. Leslye, I'm gonna do the like super embarrassing uh author intro thing that like lists
Okay.
all your accolades. But yeah, so you're the author of 18 novels, I think that I counted. Um, is that right?
I think it's well, if you count novels and novellas, I think it's 15, and there's some short stories too.
Okay, great. We'll count those. Those I count them for me, so I'll count them for everybody else too. Um, yeah, your most recent one was Daughter of the Merciful Deep. Came out in June. You've won a ton of awards. I was actually trying to gather all of them, and they were a little tough, but Song of Blood and Stone was in the top fantasy novels for Time in 2018, and then one of Time magazine's 100 best fantasy books of all time. It also got the self-published fiction, best self-published fiction from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Monsters We Defy got an Audie Award for Best Fantasy Book. It was listed as one of NPR's best books of 2022 and Paste Best Fantasy Book of 2022. Um, in addition to writing amazing novels, you've got a background in web design. You are a teacher and speaker on writing, and I think are you speaking at? I may have this wrong, so if I have it wrong, just completely correct me. Are you talking at Author Nation this year?
Yes, yes, I
Okay.
will be.
Yes, you'll be in Vegas talking in Author Nation, and you've got a conference coming up that we'll talk about too. And you host two podcasts, My Imaginary Friends, which I'm a big fan of,
Thank you.
and Ink and Magic with your co-host Inez Johnson. So did I cover
Mhm.
everything? Did I hit it all?
Yeah, I think so. I hope so
Awesome.
because I'm exhausted listening to you.
All right, so just one way we like to kick off with Dialogue Dr. Steph, any of the interviews we do, talk to us a little bit about your writing journey. How'd you get to where you are now?
Sure. I've always written. I started writing when I was a little kid. I actually just, my mom found my middle school writing teacher and found him on Facebook and like was going to brag all about me. And I
Nice.
was like, and then he emails me. He emails me like one of my early pieces of work that I did in eighth grade writing class. So
Wow, he still has it?
yeah, he like dug through his archives. I guess he just kept all his student work, which is amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yay, teachers.
Yeah. A plus for
But
that
yeah,
teacher.
always always written literary magazines and through high school and college, all of that. And then I wrote for myself for a long time. And then I got into some writing classes and workshops as an adult when I had gotten married and moved away to a different city where I didn't know anyone. And that's really when I got back into it and started taking like the week-long writing workshops in the summer that are offered at different locations.
Yeah.
And so my first novel, Song of Blood and Stone, came out. I self-published it in 2015. I had done a lot of research on self-publishing. I had done other DIY projects. I had done some indie filmmaking and helped to co-found an indie literary magazine. So I was
Wow.
really, into the whole DIY thing. And yeah, then I had several books out that first year in two different series. And then when Song of Blood and Stone had been out for a year, I was contacted by an editor at St. Martin's Press. She had seen the self-published books and had read them and liked them. And initially she asked me to pitch her something new. So I went and did like research, okay, because I hadn't done any research on traditional publishing. I'd only focused on indie. I was
Yeah.
like, well, this is a great opportunity. How do I pitch her something new? So I had to learn how to do that. And I gave her a proposal. But she eventually came back to me and she really wanted to republish the Earthsinger Chronicles, Song of Blood and Stone, and the subsequent books. And so
Gotcha.
I took them off the market as indie and re-edited them, republished them with St. Martin's Press. And so that was the beginning of my journey as a hybrid author, still doing indie and also doing traditional.
Gotcha. It's rare to find somebody that's made that like clean a crossover, I would say. How is that? What would you weigh the pros and cons for people that are thinking about like what direction they should go?
Yeah, I get that a lot because both have definitely pros and cons. With indie, we know we have to do everything ourselves or hire people. We have to manage the team. It's a business, and you have to treat it very much as a business. As a person who had started several businesses, I was all for that. With traditional, you are working with professionals, and it's nice to have that expertise in-house. And there's opportunities that I just couldn't get as an indie. The majority of indies are not going to be able to get. There's certain speaking opportunities and
Mm,
conferences you get invited to. Bookstores are obviously a big one. You can, as an indie, go to different bookstores and try to get your book there, but it's a lot of legwork as opposed to with a traditional publisher. There's no guarantee, but ideally they're going to be getting you into more bookstores and bigger bookstores.
mm,
And there's still people, media outlets and things who are really just going to look at traditional publishing because they have to cut it off. They can't look at 5 million books. So there's still plenty of opportunities there.
mm.
But you do lose control. So I have had to change titles. I don't have cover control. The edits haven't been a big problem. I'm able to push back on things. I've never been in a situation where I felt that I was being asked to make an edit that I didn't believe in,
Mm.
but there's other forms of control that I'm used to having that I like having as a kind of a control freak with my indie stuff. Choosing the cover designer and really working with them to hone that cover vision. Whereas with traditional, it's like, oh, this is the cover. Do you have any comments? And maybe I do, and maybe they listen to me, maybe they don't.
Yeah.
So that lack of control can be very difficult, but you have to kind of go into it hoping that these professionals, know what they're doing and kind of trusting that. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But the people that I've worked with at publishers have been, very I understand that they love books. They're doing this because they love it. And it's been a good collaborative experience. So I enjoy that. And then I enjoy having my own projects where I get to, run the ship, control everything, and get that out of my system.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's one of those weird opportunities that like you don't really get to choose. It kind of the choice comes to you and then you get to make it or not. So that's all
Yeah.
the journey's awesome. Yeah.
And I think that with traditional, like, yeah, you can't just choose. You can choose to pursue traditional publishing, and then you have to kind of be chosen. But I think that if people really want that, as long as you don't give up, if you get rejection after rejection, keep honing your craft. If your dream is to be traditionally published,
Yeah,
I would say it might take a lot of rejections, but if you keep at it, you're going to be the person who keeps at it. And eventually, I think, if you continue with your craft, you'll get in eventually.
that's awesome. You mentioned that early in your like rediscovery of writing as an adult, you plugged into a bunch of workshops. Would you mind talking a little? I know a lot of the community is thinking about workshops, considering workshops, like going in and out of them. What was
Mhm.
that? How did that benefit you? What was that experience for you?
Yeah, the workshop experience kind of reinvigorated my love of all kinds of writing. So I took a bunch of classes. So I moved to Norfolk, Virginia, and there's a place called the Muse Writer Center there, which was very important for me as, developing my writing. And there are writing centers in a lot of major cities, throughout the country. I know
Mhm.
Boston and Minnesota, Seattle, they have them. So there might be some where you live. And also a lot of them offer online classes. So if they're not physically there, you can still participate in these schools. And so I was taking poetry classes and meditation and writing classes, and then I got into an ongoing fiction workshop. And that was great because for a couple of years, I was with a core group of like almost the same people. We would keep, signing up again and again, working on either short stories or a novel
Mm.
and getting that critique experience with the group, learning the workshop process. And then I would start applying to these longer, go away, like camp kind of workshops. I went to Vona Voices, which is one that was for writers of color, and Hurston Wright, which is for Black writers, which is on the campus of Howard University. But there are plenty of them, like Tin House, Breadloaf. There's
Mm.
different ones for genre, for literary, for different, groups of people. And if you are interested in that, I think it's a good experience. If you have, you can take a week off in the summertime and just really focus on your craft. Other things are like retreats. So maybe it's not
Yeah.
an official workshop, but there are retreat centers and writing retreat groups where you can go and just focus and learn from professional writers and find community with other aspiring writers or people at your same level. And it was really great. I met a lot of people and I started going to those workshops in 2013. And 2011 was my first one.
Okay.
And over the course of, the people I met there, we started together. A lot of us are published now, and through various means, whether it's traditional or indie. And it's just like you kind of find some people and you kind of move along the path of this career together.
Yeah, that's exciting that you found a cohort that you've been able to like keep in touch with and keep working with over a long period of time. That's really cool.
Yeah,
That's really neat.
it helps.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd imagine. Writing often feels very lonely. So I imagine having that kind of group around you.
Yeah.
Um, so I know you're a self-proclaimed shy and an introvert.
Yes.
Um, how did you how was engaging in workshops as somebody who, may shy away from crowds?
Yeah, I mean, workshops are not for the thin-skinned. I think you have to commit to the process and develop a thicker skin. So I'm pretty good in small groups, like
Okay.
and when I decided to publish, I really, had to put myself out there in terms of getting more comfortable with public speaking and things like that that I was very uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
So now, like almost 10 years out, next year will be my 10-year anniversary of publishing. I feel much more comfortable than I ever
Happy
have.
anniversary. That's
Thank
exciting.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's crazy. But yeah, the whole workshop experience, I mean, I've had my work kind of torn apart by, a very famous, very well-respected writing teacher, author, and it doesn't feel great, but I was like, I'm there to learn and to get better. And obviously, I'm not that good yet. So, what can I do to get better? It does any kind of feedback. Your editor, your editorial letter is going to hurt.
Mm.
Anything that's not, this is the best thing I've ever read is going to like sting a little bit, I think,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
most of us.
yeah.
So, it's best to learn how to take that, whether it's a workshop or an edit experience, and use it as fuel to, make yourself better.
Yeah. And does anybody ever, I've never heard of anybody going to a workshop or any kind of like editorial review and being told this is the best thing I've ever read.
I know,
I mean,
right?
if, if
And I
anybody
mean, it's not
gets
going to be
that,
helpful, right?
no. Well, I mean, huge confidence boost, but otherwise, yeah, it's a weird. I talk to people I edit all the time this and just remind them like, hey, you paid me, asked me to give you edits on this. So
Right.
like just be prepared. I'm coming with the eye to edit. So I imagine going to a workshop is the same, that you're showing up to get that kind of,
Yeah. You want
yeah.
the help.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so you've had a lot of awards for your work, and I was just curious, what's that like? Is that encouraging? How does that feel as an author for you?
I remember when I first heard about the Time magazine thing with the 100 best fantasy books of all time. And I saw this clip come through my email, and I was like, that looks fake. That looks like some kind of spammer, like trying to trick me. I just
It's really
didn't believe
funny.
it. And then I actually saw the Real Time magazine. I'm like, what is happening here? So, I mean, it is encouraging. It can feel very surreal because there's
Yeah.
always at least for me, I experience imposter syndrome. Like, why do I deserve to be here? Is it actually good enough? Is there a trick? Is it April Fool's Day? Like, what's
Mm,
happening right now?
yeah.
Um, but I mean, it's also very extremely, I mean, I'm honored all the time. Like anytime it happens, because I do work hard. And I think, as writers, we put a lot of work and effort into it. So the recognition can be really helpful. And that's another thing with traditional versus indie. It's people don't talk about enough, but being chosen and that feeling of validation, there's
Mm,
nothing wrong with that. Like we can validate ourselves and put our work out there as indies, and I think that's wonderful. And if you also feel like you need something else, that's okay too. And so maybe whether that's an award or a traditional publisher, that can be okay. And just realize that you can't always get external validation. That can't be your only engine.
mm.
But if that's a thing that feels like something that would be useful, then there's no shame in that.
It is weird. Well, first, I would say if I had been given like the title of 100 best of anything, I think I would like have it in a neon sign like behind me at all times. So, uh, yeah, I'm impressed that you haven't like plastered it on your wall for everybody to see,
Right.
whoever talks to
That's a
you.
good idea. Maybe I should do
Yeah,
that.
oh, I totally would. I'd have like t-shirts made that that's the only t-shirt I'd wear. Um, but I really, what you're saying is really fascinating. The idea that like, I think it's super true that we feel shame and you know, that imposter syndrome kicks in really strong when we seek out that kind of
Hmm.
uh validation and um even not getting it, but just the pursuit of it, I think can really stumble some writers up and cause them to like, I don't know that I'm
Hmm.
worthy of applying for that. I don't know that I'm worthy of doing that. Yeah, and not even just awards, but even just putting yourself out there for, to be published in a journal or to have your work seen somewhere. I think sometimes can really hold us back. Um, any thoughts for anybody that's struggling with that?
Yeah, part of especially having a long career as an author is learning to trust yourself. So you have to write something that you love and trust your taste and know that there's going to be someone else out there. There's a niche out there that's going to love it too. And so we can seek this validation, this external validation. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, if you don't ever get that, it has to be enough for you. You have to be doing work that you believe in, that you love. And I think if you center that, people talk about right to market, which can be very valuable for the indie market. But I think first and foremost, you have to love what you're doing. And that's going to shine through to your readers, whoever those readers are, whether they're people on awards committees or agents and editors, or just people, on the internet buying books. And so develop that self-trust and that belief in yourself, in your own work, and doing things that you love. And I think that will take you really far.
I know that's been, I mean, people who listen to this know all about me, but that's been incredibly difficult for me, uh, just finding value in my own work.
Mm.
Was that something that came easy to you, or was that something that you had to struggle through as well? Like, how did that
It's
happen for you?
hard. Yeah. Like when I first published my first book, you know, my goal was 200 people. I had heard on some podcast that most self-published books don't sell more than 200 copies.
Hmm.
So it's like, I don't know 200 people. I know, I don't know, maybe 50. I have a bunch of cousins, but they weren't all going to buy my book.
Yeah.
So if I can get to 200, then I've cracked the people who know me and are buying it to be nice.
Nice.
And I found an audience. And so once I was able to do that with that first book, it started the ball rolling a little bit. It still hits you. I mean, 15, 18 books in, I'm still nervous every
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
I had a book come out 3 weeks ago, and it's like, will anyone read it? Will they like it? I
Hmm.
don't, I'm not like I'm confident that I've written a good book that I love, and that's
Yeah.
the best that I can do. Like that's the only thing I have control over. But yeah, each time it's still hard. So it's always a struggle. Um, yeah, and I think, some people have a harder time with that than others. But when
Yeah.
you do get that little bit, get a few reviews of people who aren't related to you, um, that can help. And if you kind of go back to those, one of the things that I do is create a little file of like nice emails that readers have sent me, nice reviews that I've seen. I don't read my reviews, but sometimes people will send me good ones that they know that are safe for me to read. And like
Nice.
have that there on those days when you feel bad. They're like, okay, somebody liked it, and someone believes in me, and I can believe in myself even more as a result.
Yeah, I love the micro goal setting. I think a lot of times that the goal we set out for is like, oh, I want to be an Amazon #1
Hmm.
bestseller in my genre, or like, #1 for at least an hour or so in whatever. And, I think what you're sharing about like, hey, I'm setting like realistic goals that like can show me that are meaningful to me, that may not be, the end all be all of, may not get you on the 100 best fantasy books of all time, but are still like, ways that you can find confidence in your work. I think that's really great. Um, yeah, I love that. So, shifting gears a little bit, talk to us about your writing, fantasy and romance. Um, what were your influences? What like got you down that journey? Was there any author that popped to you? Anybody you really loved?
When I started reading romance. I started reading paranormal romance.
Hmm.
So it was Nalini Singh and Cressley Cole. I have a whole podcast dedicated to Nalini Singh at the
Yep.
moment. Because yeah, she was a huge influence. So J.R. Ward, like those people were my first entrance into actual romance. And then also Marjorie M. Liu, who was one of my teachers at Vona, the workshop that I went to.
Wow.
And so combining, and then, I was reading a lot of YA fantasy,
Hmm.
like Kristen Kishore and Laini Taylor and people like that. And so that got me into wanting to do like a mix of fantasy romance, but I wanted to do adult, not YA fantasy romance.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice. So on your podcast, Magic and Ink, or did I flip that?
Ink and
Sorry.
Magic.
Ink
Yeah.
and Magic. Sorry, I'm dyslexic. I'm constantly flipping things all the time. So on your podcast, Ink and Magic, y'all just did 15 books in Sing's
Yeah.
Sci Challenge. Is that right?
Side
Series?
Changeling series.
Sci
Yeah.
Changeling series. Yeah. Um, what like diving into 15 books in a row like that with another author, what do you feel like you pulled from that? Like what was that experience like?
It was, yeah. So Inez Johnson, my co-host, is also my best friend. We were college roommates. So we initially read this series around the same time when they were coming out. And yeah, we wanted to do a reread. We're not done yet. We did 15. There's
Yeah.
at least five or six more. I haven't even counted them. I
Yeah,
don't
I think
know, but
there's
we're only
22. I counted them today because I was curious.
okay.
I think there's 22 of them.
All right, so
Yeah.
we got at least seven more,
Yeah.
and one's coming out in a few weeks, so maybe it just came out.
Mhm.
Uh, but rereading something that was so impactful for us and going past where we got the first time 10,
Yeah.
15 years ago has been really interesting. Like looking at why were these books so impactful for us? What do we love about them? How might we have done something different maybe? But like looking at an author who's so successful and who has so many fans and us being among them and really trying to break down, okay, what is it? And is there something we can pull into our work? We're all doing different things with our writing and we're coming at it from different places, but I always think there's something to be gleaned from going back and sort of analyzing why did this work for me? What is it about it that speaks to me? Taking the things that you really love from work
Mm.
that you love and then putting it in your own work. So hopefully I'll be going forward, like taking a few of these lessons that we've been discussing through the course of this long mammoth series.
Yeah. Have you found any moments where you were like, oh, that's where I got that from?
I don't know that specifically. I think that just, well, yeah, maybe a couple like this, some of the character stuff. When I look back at some of the books that I really lit up with,
Mm.
and like I think it was whichever, like book 12, Heart of Obsidian. I read it and I immediately started rereading it, like in the same sitting. I went back to chapter one. When that happens, I'm like, oh, I can tell that this idea or this character, this type of character imprinted
Yeah.
itself on me, and
Held on
that's
you.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was writing recently and I was writing a book and I thought I was being super creative with this theme around like time. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, this is really exciting. I'm really like coming up with something new around this theme of time. And for another project, I went back and read a book that I had like read as a child, and I realized that the author had like laid out the exact theme that I was working. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's where that comes from. That's not mine at all. But yeah, I love that you're like diving back into stuff that influenced you in the past. I think that's really neat, especially that you can do it with a friend. That's really
Yeah,
exciting.
it's fun.
Yeah. Um, do y'all have a series planned after this one when you finish off season three and after
We
the
haven't,
seven books
we
yet?
have made no plans.
Okay.
That's a conversation that will happen, but yeah, we'll have to see.
That's awesome. Um, so you've also done some things outside of writing, like you list on your website that you've done some indie filmmaking.
Mhm.
What was that like?
So my undergraduate degree is in film production, actually.
Oh wow.
And yeah, so at one point I wanted to go be an indie filmmaker. And then I quickly decided I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to edit or write scripts. And I went to graduate school for multimedia and combined like video production and computer art, web design, all of that stuff. So I didn't go that route, but I did work on, I co-directed a documentary back in the day and 48-hour film project, which is a contest that happens all around the world. I participated in it like 7 times, I think. And it's basically you make a
Nice.
short film in 48 hours. You get your friends together. We had some local actors. And yeah, from Friday night to Sunday night, you write and shoot and edit and score a film. And then it gets shown at a real movie theater in your city. And so that was a lot of fun. I've helped friends on independent films and short films. I'll be helping my brother, who is going to be, he's an actor out in LA. He'll be directing his first short film next month. So, or this month,
Wow.
I'll be going out there to help him. So I don't do film anymore, but yeah, the indie film thing was fun. Like the kind of just short, like the documentary, we did the festival scene for this documentary that was on, it's called OK Player, which is the website for the Roots. It
Yeah.
was there, they had a message boards, and this was in the early 2000s. So
Okay.
when meeting friends on message boards was still a little bit
Yeah.
weird in our
Yeah.
culture, we made this documentary. My co-director went all over the world interviewing people, and I edited it. So that was a lot of fun too.
That's very cool. What's the difference for you between that visual medium and your like writing medium?
It is, I think, and I've heard from people that I do tend to write cinematically. Like
Yeah.
I envision everything unfolding in my head like a movie, and I'm capturing it, I'm writing it down. There's also like video editing, I think helps in film editing makes my writing I think it's helped me be a better writer because I worked as an editor after college and and I tend to write short and have to expand.
Hmm.
So even though I'm cutting, I'm choosing, but when I'm visualizing it, it's sort of like I kind of see what needs to be there. And I
Hmm.
like to have it down to its bone. Like when you're cutting a film, usually do like the assembly edit, which is just the bare bones, and then you go back and you add transitions and different angles and things like that. And that's how I approach writing too. I get my skeleton, my bare bones first draft,
Hmm.
and then I go back in and add descriptions and smooth it out and figure out the themes and learn about the characters. So the process itself is actually, at least the editing side, is similar, and that's where my focus had been with filmmaking.
Do you find yourself when you're writing thinking in that, like, when you're thinking about the scene, I've talked to some writers who are like, oh, the scene comes at like the moment of conflict. Like when I'm
Mhm.
writing, what I imagine first is the moment of conflict. I've talked to other authors who are like, oh, when I'm writing, the scene first comes in like the character interaction. Like there's something about like these two characters in this moment that like drives it. Or I've talked to other authors who are like for them it's like the location. They're like, okay,
Mhm.
I know this place and I can kind of like feel out what happens in this place. When you're putting down a scene, is there one that like, or maybe something completely different that bends to you that like gets your imagination going?
I think I can't write a scene until I know the shape of it. So it's not necessarily the point of conflict, but it's like what is the turn? And usually
Hmm.
the turn of a scene is when something changes. It can be when the conflict happens, or it's like when the realization of what the conflict meant. So yeah, but before I start a scene, usually I have to wait until I sort of understand how I'm getting into it and then know what the change is going to be, what that thing is. Like, why is this a scene? A scene
Yeah.
has to happen when something changes. What is that thing that the scene is going to mean?
Hmm.
Why is it in the story in the first place? And then how do I once I hear like the first line, then I can start writing.
Yeah. I've read some of your work and I like how like part of what we teach with the dialogue doctor is dialogue centric writing, like putting the characters first and making sure your scene focuses around like the character interaction. You do that really, really well.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's part of what I enjoy about your work. I think I can definitely see that like purposefulness of a scene. I imagine that saves you a lot of time from like having to cut scenes.
I
Yeah,
think it's probably why I don't cut. Yeah, I don't have to
yeah,
cut usually.
yeah. I'm
I have to
infamous
add.
with my editors to like, hey Jeff, what is this scene doing here? It's like, oh, I was just having a really great time. And like, yeah, this has to go. Um, yeah, so you find yourself having to add when you get to your second draft.
Definitely. Yeah, my first drafts are a half to 70% as long as the final book ends up being.
Oh wow.
So I know, yeah, I'm just it's not quite like a script. I'll do dialogue in there with not a lot of tags,
Hmm.
but I have to like try at least to get everything down. So I'm really just building the scaffolding and then I have to like hang the drywall in the next draft and
Yeah, yeah,
then you put down the floor and then start painting.
yeah. I love that. Um, World building's a huge thing for you, especially as a fantasy writer.
Mhm.
So how at what stage in that draft does the world building start to solidify for you?
It's all throughout. It's like I can't
Okay.
even start the draft until I have an idea of the world, but I don't do all the world building up front.
Mm.
My whole philosophy is like people who I just met too many authors who and writers who have spent 7 years or 11 years building a world and don't have a book at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's like it goes along the way. I get the core, and then as I'm drafting, I am asking and answering questions about the world. So it's like I don't
Mm.
need to know the economic system necessarily when I start. But when I get to a scene where someone's at the market, I'm like, oh, where is it getting these vegetables from? And what is the agriculture like? And what's the shipping like? And so that I can figure out, okay, what is in the market and why, who's buying what and who's selling what, and
Yeah.
then keep moving through the scene. But as it comes, when something comes up that I need to know, hopefully it's integrated with everything else because I have, there's kernels there from the very beginning, like, okay,
Mm.
well, this is a capitalist society, or this is a socialist, or whatever kind of economic system it might be. If it has to be relevant and make sense for what the characters are going through and the overall plot and arcs of everything.
Yeah. So if you were coaching a writer who's world building, I like what you're saying about not getting stuck in the planning trap. Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. I can spend like a year in a spreadsheet if I let myself. It's very
Right.
dangerous. Yeah. Um, how would you tell an author that they know when they have enough
Of the world.
of the world?
It's if you're doing it while you're writing, I mean, the world is in service to the story, and the story is in service to the characters, really. It's like as a character first person, as using dialogue to exemplify characters. A story is about a character making a change,
Hmm.
generally, and that's kind of the philosophy that I hold.
Yep.
So everything has to kind of come back to that, where they're not doing things randomly. The world is not just there to be cool. Being cool is nice. Like if you have something that's really cool, yeah, put it in. But like, how does that connect to everything else? If
Yeah.
it's just cool by itself and doesn't mean anything, then it's kind of empty and it's not as cool.
Gotcha.
Um, so when it comes back to the character and you only have as much as you need, then I think it's enough. It's like sometimes people want to go off on tangents and I'm just trying to be efficient and help people get their stories done in this lifetime. You
Yeah.
know?
No, I love that. I love that you're like centering on character and character growth and change, and then asking like, hey, what aspects of the world can serve
Hmm.
this character's, development through the story.
Yeah.
I think that's really
And how
cool.
does the world create conflict that the characters are then thrown into?
Hmm.
How does the world solve the conflict that they're in? It will do everything. It can do so much work. It's just
Yeah.
like what does it need to do? Or if you have your heart set on this type of world, then you can also backtrack it to the characters. What are the characters that can only exist in this world? Or how does the conflict that you've created for this world, find me a character that is going to be thrown into that. And it's going to be the worst thing ever. They're going to have to overcome all of their internal obstacles because the world is this way.
Hmm. You ever find yourself in a world trap where you have to like rewrite a bunch or figure something out because when you get to the end of the novel, it's not working anymore?
With Earthsinger Chronicles is a total of 7 books, 4 novels and 3 novellas that I did not plan all. I mean, I had like a sentence about what each was going to be. So
Yeah.
I definitely would write myself into corners, and there'd be like 2 books on the shelf, and I have to, and I realize, oh, I wrote something that totally contradicts what I need to have happen in book 5.
Hmm.
So yeah, you have to find creative ways. I have found that when you are right, when you've written yourself into a corner like that, there is something. Like if you go back and reread everything, I've always left myself some kind of breadcrumb or some kind of kernel that I didn't, like a throwaway line that I can build on to get myself
Hmm.
out, to either kind of elegantly retcon things or be like, oh, well, they didn't know this back then. Now they've discovered this new thing and it fixes the problem that I
That's
had, you
great.
know?
Yeah.
Those kind
That,
of boundaries force you to be more creative. And I think you can find really great things out of that.
that's awesome. I love that. Um, so you've got a course on world building called Imaginary World Building that you
Mhm.
offer on your website. What are some of the big mistakes you see authors making uh, in the world building, in addition to like what we just talked about, being stuck in that planning trap? What else are you
Yeah,
seeing them doing?
that's definitely a big one. I think that not having it like connect,
Mm,
when it's separate, when they think that the world has to be completely separate from the characters and the plot, or they're not really mining the world when they get stuck. That's another
mm,
thing that I talk about in the course. A lot of it is like, okay, when you're stuck, because I think we all get stuck with different aspects of it. Um, how do you answer these questions? What
mm,
questions do you have to ask, and how does the world solve it? So people get kind of rigid, and flexibility is also important in world building, because if you think things have to be this way, like what can you be flexible about? If is it your character that you have to have this thing this way, then something in the world would have to shift.
mm,
I think that also because of, and if you're familiar with Becca Syme and Strength Finders,
hmm.
because of my particular strengths, like I am number one intellection. So I'm
Okay.
thinking
Yeah, I
about
was about to
things.
say, do you mind sharing your top five?
Yeah. So it's intellection, input, deliberative, consistency, learner are my top 5.
Nice.
And it's a very strategic, like brainy, I feel like the robot, the robot strengths are what I have. But I'm thinking about things like I'm going all the way through the line on different aspects of the story.
Hmm.
And I find that people get stuck, or, writers that I work with sometimes have issues with, not thinking how things are connected, how the
Mm,
chain of events happened. Um, and depending on the genre, it can be less important. I know like fantasy and sci-fi readers tend to be like higher compliance. Like they want things to make sense. You will get emails if your, faster than light drive doesn't make any sense to them, or whatever
mm,
for a sci-fi, or in fantasy, if someone's drinking tea and it's come from some country that can't possibly grow tea, like little things like that. And
Yeah.
while some of those things can be distractions that can have you just world building ad infinitum, sometimes you can use the connections of things like, okay, where is this grown? And can I use that? Is that a country that's at war with this other country?
Mm,
How does this all form a cohesive world that feels rich and lived in? And so when people a lot of people take my course because they've heard that their world isn't as rich as it could be or is a little bit
mm,
thin. And I think it's because they haven't just ask a few more questions, connect a few more dots, go back another layer in
gotcha.
what you're doing and why this is the way it is and what the rationale, what the motivation was for these things being this way.
Nice. So not just creating that web of a world, but trying to figure out how that web also interconnects with the themes and the character development that you're
Exactly.
going. I love that. Um, are you, do you find any, you and I both live in and around Baltimore. Um, you find any inspiration for your worlds in the city we're around?
I did. I have a series that half so part of it takes place in Baltimore.
No way.
Um,
Which one is that?
it's one of my early one, the Angel Born, Angel Fall
Okay.
series. Yeah, or it's called the Eternal Flame series.
Okay.
And then I've written about DC, but I don't write about Baltimore too much. But yeah, that particular series, I just, sometimes when you're writing about the place where you're actually in, it feels too close.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Baltimore's a great city though, and I used to work at Johns Hopkins University, the Homewood
Okay.
campus, and
Nice.
so there's a lot of this is a really unique. I was explaining to someone how it's called Charm City and why it's called Charm City, someone who didn't know.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think it's great fodder. I love reading stuff that takes place in Baltimore or in Maryland in general.
Yeah. I was terrible at world building when I first started writing. I think it's probably my biggest weakness. And so for my first, I guess 7 books, I, uh, I just would go and like take a picture of a corner and be like, all right, this is where this is happening.
Oh wow,
Just like write that moment in that place because I
that's
couldn't,
kind of cool though. That's an interesting technique.
it was a fun project for me. I don't know that anybody else enjoyed it. Um, I also I had a couple chapters where they were like the characters were walking through the city, like doing a quote unquote patrol. It's an urban fantasy novel. And I actually walked the like 15 miles that they walked so I could like trace it through every street and
Oh
line and like where they went.
wow,
And I was like, it was a fun game for me. I was like, this is entertaining. I don't know that anybody else will enjoy this, but I'm
that's
having a
cool
great
though.
time. Yeah, I don't know if it was, but it was fun. Um, yeah, anyway. Uh, so last last question. Um, you noted on your website that your favorite movie as a kid was The Neverending Story.
Yes.
What I personally found that movie very traumatic, um, especially when they kill the horse. Um,
That is very true.
oh, so hard. Nightmares for days.
Right?
Um, what drew you to that story? And where do you find it in your work now? Like,
Oh, yeah,
where's that
that's
coming from?
interesting. I think, Bastion, the main character, I connected with, him. Well, I was bullied a little bit in school. I had some difficult experiences in like an elementary school, and then
Hmm.
finding solace in books. And he's in this attic, he's reading, he has to like he eats the apple at one point. If you
Yeah,
remember the book. You're in the book, and then you realize you're starving. Wait, I find some food, but I still want to be in the book. Like
yeah,
those little things. And having this fantasy world that you can just dive into and imagine yourself in, and you can save it. Like I
yeah,
feel like as a kid, that was just the amazing. You are the hero.
yep,
It requires you, the reader, the person who is not really active, but your mind is active. But then you get scooped into it.
yeah.
That
Right,
is,
right. The end of the story is that the yeah,
yeah,
nice.
exactly.
That's awesome. Um, you have a retreat coming up in Baltimore in
hmm
uh in October. Am I getting
It's in
that right?
November.
In
Yeah.
November. Do you mind sharing a little about that?
Yeah, we're doing my friend Ines Johnson, who I do the Ink and Magic podcast, and our other very good friend, Cerise Ray Murphy. We all have publishing businesses that are a little bit different. Traditional, they're indie, and they do their indies differently. So yeah, we decided to come together and have a retreat at this lovely retreat center where I've done a personal retreat and I've done some meditation courses there before. It's very serene, and it'll be fun. It'll be a weekend of finding community, and we'll be teaching some workshops and having some cool creative activities and then writing time. So right now we've had a lot of interest, so there's a waiting
Hey, that's
list.
exciting. That's really
Yeah,
great.
but we want to do more. So this is the first one, and
Okay.
if you get on the waiting list, we will definitely alert you about future ones in 2025 and beyond, hopefully.
Gotcha. That's amazing. Congratulations on like filling up so quickly. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. And go get on, I just recommend anybody in the area go get on the waiting list because it looked amazing. I was looking at the site. I wish I was available at the time, but yeah, it looks really good. Um, all right. Anything else you wanted to talk about today? I feel like I've picked your brain and, you know, held you on the air, uh, long enough, tortured you with my questions for long enough.
I know.
Yeah.
It's great. It's always great. I love talking about writing. I love talking about craft and world building and all of that. So
Yeah. Well, thanks so
it's
much for
fun.
giving us time. Um,
Thank
again,
you.
podcast is Ink and Magic and My Imaginary Friends. Both are really great.
And I have a
Um,
newsletter for writers at myimaginaryfriends.net.
yeah, and yeah, go look up everything at imaginaryfriends.net. We can find your books there too and everything. All
Yeah,
right. Well, thanks so much. I'm gonna hit stop and we can talk a little bit more.
sure. Thanks.